amen. Now we're in part 3 of this 3-part series on marital mayhem. Should I wait? Should I work? Should I walk? Today we're going to be talking about DisAssembly, another component of a justifiable ground for divorce, which God really hates divorce, but we're going to address the fact that he is aware of that and he does permit them under certain circumstances. In Matthew 19, verses 4 through 5, Yeshua states one of the biblically justifiable grounds for ending a marriage. And it's not adultery by itself, but it's something called porneia. And we talked about that our last time. But Yeshua answered and said, have you not read, as he's talking to these Pharisees, he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. We call that leaving, cleaving, and then weaving a life together. Yeshua says it wasn't like this in the beginning. People wanting to get divorced, separated, get away from one another. So what was it in the beginning? Well, in the beginning, God made a man and called him, or made a male and called him a man. And he made a female and called her a woman. This male and female became one through a complementary physical union. This complementary union is one where neither two males nor two females can physically have, and that's by design. This is why, from a biblical perspective, only a male and female can have a marriage. Let me say this. I am speaking to those who want to, have been, and know the Lord. Through Messiah Yeshua, you have put your trust in him that you might follow after him and his father, getting to know his father. There are people who might not know that, and so they would look at some of the things we say, and they would try to use reason to say, well, that doesn't make sense, or why would you do this, that, or the other? Listen, that's a good place for some questions and answers. But I do want to state very clearly, the Bible is the basis for the things that we believe, and we know who we believe, what we believe, and why we believe, and there's evidence for our faith, not just a good feeling. Just wanted to insert that in there. Now, let me say again, from a biblical perspective, only a male and female can have a marriage. If that's a union between, if it's a union between two people other than that, then it's a civil union. Two people can commit their lives to each other and they can make it legally binding, but that alone doesn't make it a marriage in God's eyes. In Malachi chapter 2, verse 14, we read, Yahweh has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth. She is your companion and your wife by covenant. We learn that a marriage is a covenant-based union between a male and a female, a man and a woman, as God has designed it. And he witnesses that union as a covenant. Why is this so very important? Because marriage is the foundation. Yes, the reason Yahweh created the foundation of the institute of marriage is found in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, where we read, God blessed them, the male and female he created, and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that creeps on the earth. You see, the male and female were to oversee the whole of creation on Yahweh's behalf, replicating the image of God everywhere their sons and daughters would establish new families and advancing God's kingdom through family. Therefore, marriage, the centerpiece and cornerstone of the family, is the reason God created it. It wasn't just, I want you two people to get together and then see what you all can do, get together like bunnies and have more mini-me's. That wasn't the idea. It was so that he could establish a foundation for a strong society. I wanted to lead off with that So we can see why God hates divorce. He wants us to look for ways to keep the union, while too often we look for justifiable grounds to get out of it. And from God's perspective, it's easier to get out of a civil arrangement than it is to break a covenant. That's why I need believers to know, recognize, and understand that a marriage is a covenant relationship and a civil union. You can't just say, I want God to bring us together. I'm going to let the judge tear us apart. That's not the way the Father intended it. We looked at 5 reasons often given for divorce in general, not an exhaustive list, but just a representation. And some of those popular reasons are communication issues, educational differences and levels, infidelity, religious belief variations, and financial problems. We also began to look at a biblically justifiable grounds for divorce. And we talked about last time porneia, which is referenced in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 19, verses 3 through 10, and Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. A second reason is abuse, and we're going to address that today, and abandonment or desertion, which we find in 1 Corinthians 7. But there is also another reason why a marriage may end that no one has an argument with, and that is death. Since we only touched on abuse and abandonment the last time we were here, we're going to pick up there. So turn, if you would, or jump, if you would, or read the screen if you can, to Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to be looking at verses 21, 28 through 30, and then 33, where it reads, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. In this same way, verse 28, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does for the church. Verse 30, for we are members of his body. Each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. This means any form of abuse is prohibited. What kind of abuses are we going to look at? Verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is a type of psychological and mental abuse that involves the use of oral, gestured, and written language directed at its target. It can include the act of harassing, labeling, insulting, scolding, rebuking, or excessive yelling towards a person. Another type of abuse is emotional abuse or psychological abuse, often called emotional abuse, is a form of abuse characterized by a person subjecting or exposing another person to a behavior that may result in a psychological trauma, including anxiety, chronic depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah, that's a real thing. Then there's physical abuse, which is any intentional act causing injury, trauma, bodily harm, or other physical suffering to another person by way of bodily contact. It's a type of abuse that involves physical violence, such as hitting, kicking, pushing, biting, choking, throwing objects, or using weapons. Again, not acceptable in a marriage. And then there is sexual abuse. That's a behavior or act forced upon a woman or man without their consent by a man or woman. Sexual abuse is the intentional action by an abuser that uses against someone they perceive as weaker than they are. They're trying to exercise control. And in a marriage, that could look like, let me see, fear. So I'm going to go along with this because I'm afraid of you, even though you can say no. Well, if you say no, no is still no. There's body shaming, and that should not happen as well inside of a marriage. Shouldn't happen outside of one either. But marriage does have privileges for both married partners, but mutual respect must always come first. You see, Continual abuse in any form may become justifiable grounds for a divorce. Each situation needs wise spiritual and legal counsel before action is taken. And depending upon the reason and the grounds, you may need to get that counsel sooner than later. Then there's abandonment. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, it's written, if anyone doesn't provide for his own household, and especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I think the King James calls them an infidel. In matrimonial law, yes, there's something called matrimonial law. Abandonment is a form of marital misconduct which occurs when one spouse brings the marital cohabitation to an end without justification, without consent, and without intent of renewing the marital relationship. That's a long way of saying deserting the relationship, walking out on it. You know, I'm going to go pick up a pack of cigarettes, or as we used to tease, I'm going to go pick up a pack of candy cigarettes. I mean, the person never showed up again. No, that's desertion. One question that I had that I looked into was, how long can a person be gone like that before it's considered desertion and you may consider dissolving or divorcing that relationship? And in one article, legal article I came across, it says 12 months. If they've been gone 12 months, you haven't heard anything or what have you, now it's time. And during that time, you should have been seeking spiritual counsel as well, if that comes to be your situation. But that would be the general time frame. So it's not like you got to wait 10 years or 15 years or 7 years, things of that nature. But again, it's still not a very easy thing. And when someone just walks out, the question is, you know, what prompted that? What drove them to that particular decision? Oftentimes it's seen as a man doing it, but there are women who have actually walked out on their marriages as well. Now, knowing that God hates divorce, but it looks like things are going to be moving in that direction, like a divorce or a legal separation, then you need to be aware of the adverse impact of divorce. Now, why am I really pressing on this? Because before you get married, you should realize it's not because you just fell in love, because it's going to take more than in love to stay together when the roller coaster of life hits you. The laboratory of life has some experimental outcomes that you might not expect, and you need to be ready for the long haul when you begin. I mean, think about it. If you're not married and you're thinking about married, think about, I'm going to wake up to this person for the next 10, 20, 40 plus years, unless God causes one of us to pass away. 50 years or more. That's right, the long haul. But if that's broken for whatever reason, there's an adverse impact that the couple is going to experience individually. One or both are going to experience a roller coaster of emotions if they do decide to divorce. And that would include loss of identity. Well, you know, I was a husband, I was a wife. I'm not that. Now I'm single. Anger, anxiety, confusion, depression, guilt, loneliness, resentment, feeling isolated when from your joint friends because they may choose a side and it's not you. This will affect your social life. Make no mistake about that. Husbands and wives in particular, the added financial stress of alimony or child support, increased responsibility for now 2 households. Co-parenting can go from co-parenting to no parenting, depending upon how that is. You didn't pick him up on time. I'm not going to let you see her. You can't do this with her. I mean, all these kinds of things can happen because now the two who became one have now fractured and broken that relationship. And when children are involved, it has another really bad impact, which we'll address in just a moment. There can be an overwhelming sense of loss when there's a divorce, similar to death. But unlike death, where you can heal because the person is gone, not to return, you'll see them in eternity if you're both believers. Encounters with an ex can be like reopening that wound again and again every time you see them, depending upon the relationship, delaying the healing process. As I said, this is for the adults When children are involved, there are additional considerations. When a child is between the ages of 3 to 5, and they don't see one of their parents around, they may have several questions that they ask in their minds, like, well, why did they go away? Was I too mischievous? Was it my fault? My father or my mother left? Don't they love me anymore? Where are they? What's going on? Children between the ages of 6 and 12 may ask questions like the younger one, except not in their mind, but out loud. Why? Because that's a very curious age. While a younger child, again, will ask questions in their mind, this group is going to be very verbal about it. And they might insert themselves in some of the discussions the parents have going on. Like, well, if you love me so much, why can't you stay together? Why are you making me suffer? You know, what's going on? Was it my fault? Did I do something wrong? This is how a child perceives things. Remember, they can't process information the way adults do. We need to stop trying to make them do that and stop adultifying children. They can't handle that, whether it's in a divorce situation or any situation. Adult situations need to be handled by adults, covering for any children to ensure that they don't get overloaded, emotionally overloaded with things that they can't address or process anyway. So considerations before separating, dissolving, or divorcing a marital relationship. Remember, God hates divorce because he designed marriage to be the foundation of society. And when families break down, society is going to break down. I think we see a lot of evidence of that now, sadly. God hates divorce because he designed the male and female, the husband and the wife, to oversee his creation together as a unit. They can't just do it independently. They are supposed to do it together. That's why the two become one. Third point, though, God hates divorce, but recognizes there are cases where a marriage might end in dissolution or divorce. So he gave parameters for justifiable grounds. Traditionally, a wedding ceremony began with the words, "Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today in the presence of God and before these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony," set apart matrimony, which should never be entered into lightly, but rather with a healthy reverence for the commitment and sacrifice needed to maintain and grow the marriage bond. I'm finding more and more weddings include God less and less. That's really interesting, since marriage was his idea in the first place. More on this next. Everybody.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
Cold.
You said cold?
Yeah.
Then we're going to have to pray for some warmth on up. I'm going to have to get a little more detail on that one. But I'm glad to hear your voice.
Hey, Stephanie.
He said, hey. Oh, yeah, she just dropped her line, but she says hello because you're not too far away.
Okay.
Okay, but I'm going to reach out to you a little bit later on. But
okay, love you.
I love you too. Have a shalom-filled day. Shabbat
You
shalom.
do the same.
Thank you.